Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about navigating the difficult relationship. From simple disagreements to emotionally abusive behaviors, you deserve respect and kindness. All the information on this show is meant for educational purposes only. Always seek a professional for your mental health and well-being, and always pick your battles wisely. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Thanks for joining me for another episode. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the Mean Workbook. If you haven't heard of that, just listen at the end of the episode and I talk about that. But I get right into the subject matter, typically. I'll get right into it today. Somebody wrote to me and said, I need help. I'm 2 years into this relationship that was started on the foundation of healing and redeeming abuse from another stint 5 years ago. He fell back into his old habits pretty quickly. It boils down to refusing accountability and blaming me and my, quote, approach. He acknowledged his abusive behavior toward me, even joined a program for it for a short time. He asked for my help and insight to change himself. I swear he was genuine in his declarations of stopping the violence, but there was always some kind of caveat that placed blame onto me for his behaviors. Some time into the relationship, after being spat on, cheated on, lied to, called horrid names, my things broken, I started to react in emotionally violent ways myself. This, of course, has given him fuel to accuse me of being abusive, and he has doubled down on refusing accountability because of it. I had done so much research into this. Your podcast has been a great resource as well. I see how my behavior has caused more conflict and also how it could be described as abusive. I want to be personally responsible for myself without enabling him to feed his narrative of pure victimhood. There's so much more to everything, and I'm losing my mind trying to find help and sorting it all out. Resources all point to abandoning the whole thing, but I see how both of our stories coexist in objective reality, and that's where the resolution could live, right? All right, thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry you're going through this. There are a couple things I want to point out before I really get into it, but the first thing that you wrote here is that he fell back into his old habits pretty quickly. This is the moment of decision. And I know this decision has already passed, but just in case somebody needs to hear this, this is the moment of decision when you get back into a relationship and old habits start showing their ugly face again, the old emotionally abusive habits. Once you start seeing them, that's what to expect from now on. I can't put it any lighter way. I can't put it in a nicer way. Once you start seeing these old toxic patterns, these emotionally abusive behaviors that you saw before, that's what you'll continue to see. Because someone who's healed isn't doing those things. They're not that way anymore. Someone who hasn't, or hasn't reflected, or hasn't gone through therapy or whatever, someone who hasn't healed will do the same behaviors they did before, and once that happens, you can't see it as temporary. You can't see it as something that you hope will stop, because they're showing you the same behaviors or something similar. So it is vital that you see that and you tell yourself, this is still who they are. If you choose not to see that, then this is what happens. I'm not going to say 100% of the time, but 99.9% of the time, if the behaviors that you saw before, if you see one or two of them again, you're going to continue seeing them and it will get just as bad, sometimes worse than before. So this is just kind of a warning. This person who wrote, I want to thank them for helping to warn others about what can and does happen. But that is the first thing you want to look for. Is the old behavior reappearing? Is it repeating itself? Because if it is, you've got to address it right away. This is exactly who you were last time and what you were doing last time, and it has to stop now. That might be one way to address it. Another way to address it is, I don't want to be here if you're going to do this, so I'm leaving. That's extreme, but it might be what you have to do to show them that this behavior is unacceptable. So there are other ways to challenge that as well. There are other ways to communicate how you feel about it. But that does involve something very important, which is knowing you deserve to be treated better. And something I see in this person's message over and over again is that they mistreated me and I continued the relationship. They mistreated me again. They betrayed me. They lied to me. They spit on them. I mean, there are some pretty bad things in this message that this person went through. And the person didn't leave. They probably tried to put their foot down. They probably tried to say, stop doing that, but the other person didn't. And if you don't have a specific rule in your life, your boundaries, if you don't know what you value and you don't know what the limits are, then the extent of the hurtful behavior is unlimited, or it can be unlimited. You have to know your own limits. What is your limit? Because if you don't define that, this could go on indefinitely. The challenge is we get into these relationships with people that we hope will change. We hope that they'll see us suffering and stop doing the behaviors. But when they see the suffering and they don't stop, it won't stop. Because they're witnessing the suffering and still not stopping the behaviors. So what's most important is to know what your limits are. And you have to define those. You have to define those limits in your life. You have to say, I will not tolerate whatever it is. I will not tolerate someone cheating on me. That's my limit. I will not tolerate someone lying to me. That's my limit. If you don't define these things, the relationship will continue and your toleration and resilience will strengthen. That's great sometimes. It's great to be tolerant. It's great to be resilient. It's not great when you are tolerant and resilient in an abusive relationship of any kind. Your toleration and resilience should not strengthen, should not grow in order to accommodate abusive behavior. And I know what happens. We fall in love. It's usually a romantic relationship. We fall in love and we feel so connected and we've seen the good side of them. And when you've seen the good side of somebody, you want to see that again. And then it comes up every now and then, and that's the person you miss. That's the person you care about. And you want that back. So you stay longer and you tolerate more because it shows up every now and then. And you think, okay, it's there, which means there's a possibility of them coming back. There's a possibility that person is going to realize just how much they're hurting me, and they're going to come back. They're going to return because maybe they're going through some personal stuff and they get angry at me, but really I'm not the problem. Or maybe you believe you are the problem, and that's why you keep tolerating it and you keep working on yourself, thinking that if you show up better, they'll stop being so hurtful. But that's why it's so important to know your limits. Because if you decide to stick around, if you decide to stay in a relationship where somebody has been hurtful to you or is continuously hurtful to you, and you haven't defined what your limit is, what I call your threshold, if you don't define that in yourself, you will never get out of a situation because you won't know when to stop tolerating. You won't know when to stop accepting bad behavior as the norm. So you have to define what your limit is or what your limits are. And I know there are people listening now that have been in a relationship for years, and they might say, I've tolerated so much. What? It couldn't be any worse. They've already done all these things to me. What more is there? What more can I do? This is where you have to stop and reflect on your life and ask yourself what you want in your life. What do you want in the other person? If it's a romantic relationship, what do you want in a partner? Because a lot of people listening now don't want what they're getting from their partner. They also may not want to change what they're doing in order to get what they want in a partner, meaning they may not want to get out of this relationship. Maybe it's difficult. Maybe it's financially impossible. Maybe there's a lot invested. Maybe there are kids. Maybe there's a commitment in the house, and maybe they work together. Maybe you are in a situation that is very difficult to change. But this is where reflection starts. You have to reflect on what you are doing in your life. What are you accepting in your life? What are you tolerating in your life? And what do you want in your life? What do you want for a partner or a family member or whoever is being hurtful to you? What do you want in them? When you know what you want and you realize that the other person isn't providing what you want, then you have to ask yourself if you're in a no-win situation. And that might be a hard question to answer, because your answer might be, yeah, I know I'm in a no-win situation. I know no matter how long I stay here, it will never get better. And so these are reality checks in your life that are vital for your general health and well-being, for your mental health, for your emotional health. These are vital that you consider them, because if you hadn't considered them before, if you didn't have criteria before on what you will and won't accept in your life, which I call boundaries, if you never have defined these boundaries before, start today. What you will not tolerate, even if you have to start enforcing these things today. Let's just say that you told yourself, I will never tolerate lying in my relationship. Let's just say you said that 10 years ago, and it's been nothing but lies ever since. Start today. What will you not tolerate? Let's just say it's lying. I will not tolerate another lie in this relationship. And then we get to the hard part, because if and when they lie again, what are you going to do about it? What are the consequences? What's going to happen? This is not easy. I know some people are in a very difficult situation to leave. And I know that there are those that will say they only lied a few times, or they only lied once, or whatever the thing they're dealing with is. If it's not lying or cheating or something like that, it's just hurtful behavior, and you're trying to get through it, and you're trying to get past it, you're trying to work on it. The thing is, are they working on it? Are they doing something about their own behaviors? And I'm going to come right back to this person who wrote. This person said that they believe that they are part of the problem, because they are doing what they believe to be abusive behaviors as well. And from what I read here, it's reactive abuse. I have an episode on reactive abuse. You may already know what reactive abuse is, but if you don't, it's when you have no other choice but to become abusive yourself in order to be heard, in order to be understood, in order to get your message across so they can hear it. It's like they don't know any other language until you are that way too. I don't recommend it, but this is what happens, is we can only be abused for so long until we say, that's it, I've had enough, stop it. And then we have to become assertive in order to get our message heard, our voice heard. That assertion is perceived as reactive abuse. And yes, it can be abusive. But there's a difference between someone who is actively being emotionally abusive and reactively being emotionally abusive. The person who is actively being emotionally abusive wants to control you, wants to change you, wants things their way no matter what, and doesn't care if you hurt. That's the extent of a lot of abusive behaviors. The person who is reactively abusive, the one who's trying to be heard and trying to be understood, wants to change for the other person. They want to do the right thing, but everything they've tried doesn't work. So they have no choice but to stop trying to change and start pushing that abusive energy in the other direction, pushing it back on them. And again, it's not necessarily abuse. It's just a reaction to the abuse. And they call it reactive abuse. But I don't like calling it reactive abuse. But sometimes you have no other way to get your message across but to become so assertive and maybe even aggressive that they finally hear it. Or maybe they finally stop doing whatever they're doing because they can't hear it in a normal way. They can't hear it like a normal person would communicate it in a regular, quote, normal relationship. And it seems the only way they'll listen is if you become so assertive, so aggressive, even emotionally abusive, so that they finally get it. But then where does that lead us? It leads us exactly what this person wrote. It leads us to two people doing hurtful behaviors toward each other just to get their thoughts heard, their emotions expressed, and it goes nowhere because everyone feels hurt at the end of the day. And the person doing the reactive abuse, the person who is reacting to the abusive behavior, notices that maybe this time they're heard, so they do that again and again. And it becomes just like this person wrote. They said they're losing their mind, trying to find help, sorting it all out. And maybe they should abandon the whole thing, but because they see how they're both contributing to it, this is what the question is, right? We're both contributing to this, and maybe the solution lies in the middle somewhere. The solution lies within you, and the solution lies within the other person. And what I mean by that is a concept that I adopted myself, which is if I have a problem with a person that I care about, that's my problem, not theirs. That is my philosophy. To this day, I follow that philosophy. If I have a problem with my partner, that's my problem, not hers. What that does is it puts the focus back on me, and I have to take care of it myself. So if I have a problem with something she says to me, maybe she yells at me all the time, which is not true, but let's just say it's true. She yells at me all the time, and I can never do anything right. That might be considered an emotionally abusive relationship. She yells at me all the time. I can't do anything right no matter how hard I try. So I have to look at that situation and ask myself, do I have a problem with that? Yeah, I have a problem with that. Is that my problem or hers? If I make it her problem, then what I'm doing is I'm more likely to push it back on her, tell her she's wrong, tell her she needs to change, try to control her. All of this energy going back to her because I'm making it her problem. So I'm not taking responsibility for what I need to do for myself. I'm trying to change or control the other person. So what I'm going to do instead is tell myself, if I have a problem with her, it's my problem, not hers. That forces me to look inward and ask myself, do I want to allow this kind of behavior into my life? Do I want to allow her to continue yelling at me and make me feel bad, and no matter what I do, it's not right? So do I want that in my life? Because if I don't want that in my life, then I need to do something about it. And that doesn't mean forcing her to stop. It means telling her, look, I can't be around you when you act this way. That might be what I do. That might be one of my responses. I can't be around you if you keep blaming me for things. I don't feel loved. I don't feel respected. I feel like this isn't an equal partnership at all. And I feel like I can't do anything right. And maybe, you know what? Maybe that's true. Maybe I can't do anything right in your eyes. So why am I here? Why am I accepting this behavior in my life? Even if you are right, that's not very nice. It's not very nice to say how bad I am, how wrong I am, and how much I'm ruining our relationship. That doesn't make me feel loved, doesn't make me feel supported, doesn't make me feel like we are equals trying to work on things together. It just makes me feel like I'm a loser, like I'm inferior. And if I feel inferior to my partner because they are constantly pointing out how wrong and terrible I am, what am I doing here? That's why I say, if I have a problem with her, that's my problem. And so I'm going to deal with my problem. What's my problem? I don't like being called this name. I don't like feeling unloved and unsupported. I don't like feeling like a loser. I don't like feeling like I have to change who I am. I just want somebody to accept me for who I am. So I don't like all these things. So I need to do something about it. And it has nothing to do with her. It has everything to do with me. So I can say, look, you may feel all these things, and maybe in your mind you feel that you're right, but I don't want to be around somebody who looks at me that way and thinks of me that way and doesn't want to work on things together. I don't want to be around someone who sees me unhappy and doesn't really care if I'm happy. I don't want to be in that kind of situation, so I'm going to take care of myself. I know I'm talking about a perfect world. I know I'm talking about how easy it is to go out there and honor yourself, honor your boundaries, let other people know you have limits. But this is a mindset that I think is important to adopt. At least start thinking in this way. Start moving in that direction. And so that's the only thing I have to say to this person. You have had your limits broken over and over again, but I have a feeling you don't even know what those limits are. You haven't defined them. And if you did, you wouldn't be asking the questions you're asking now, because you would have already come up with a direction to take in your own mind. You would know the answer because you would know your limit. It wouldn't be something that I could give you. I can't tell you what your limit is, and that's the difficult part with a lot of the questions I get. I can't tell you what your limit is. You can tell me, this person hurt me, this person cheated on me, this person spat on me. I mean, that's awful enough. Just one of those things is awful enough. But if you told me that, my limit would have already been to have left. I would have not been able to tolerate any of that. But that's my limit. So your limits are going to define what you would do. Because I have learned that there is a certain point that when something doesn't change, it won't change. And because I know it won't change, I have to accept that. I have to accept that fact that it won't change. Now, just real quick, the thing that you wrote at the end of your message is that you believe because you're this way and this person has been this way, since you're both doing these things, let's just say that you stopped. Would they stop? Let's just say that you stopped doing what you were doing. Would they stop? My thought is that because you started after they were doing it, after they were doing these behaviors, and then you started doing these behaviors, my thought is that no matter what you do, they're going to do the same behaviors anyway. Before you started doing these behaviors, they were doing these behaviors, at least from what I read in your message. And then there was reactive abuse to get your message across, to get yourself heard. And now the cycle won't end because you're both doing it, but it's not only that, the cycle won't end because one of you, and it comes right back to this, one of you has to focus on yourself and tell yourself, if I have a problem with that person, it's my problem. So I need to deal with it. I can't change them. I can't make them do anything. And if it's my problem, then I have to know my limits. I have to know my boundaries. I have to know my values. I have to know what I will accept in a relationship. And if what I'm going through now is unacceptable, then I have to do something about that. Or at least accept that I won't get what I want in a relationship and stay in the relationship if you want. I mean, you don't want to stay in a relationship that continues to belittle you and hurt you and injure you in all these ways. But if you have to stay, at least for now, then you have to accept that that person won't change. Even if they somehow change or want to change months from now or whatever, right now they won't change. And that is what you accept so that you can take that fact and integrate it into every decision you make from this point on. You can't say, well, if they change, I'll do this, or when they change, I'll do that, or when they stop hurting me, I'll do that. You need to eliminate that from your line of thinking, because if you keep it in there, that's what keeps things going indefinitely. And so the only way I've seen this kind of situation, this kind of relationship change, whether one's doing the bad behavior or both are doing what they see as bad behaviors, is when one of them finally focuses on themselves and asks themselves, what are they going to do about it? What am I going to do about being treated this way? And once you focus on the other person and say, well, I want to change them, I want to stop them, I want to be reactive, abusive, I want to show them that what they're doing is wrong, so I'm going to be aggressive, assertive, whatever, in return, then nothing ever changes. Because what you're doing is investing more into the toxic cycle that is already churning in the relationship. And if that continues churning because you're both investing into the relationship instead of yourselves, what you end up with is more of the relationship the way it is. And I hope that makes sense. And I know this isn't a solid answer for you. I know that maybe you want me to say, yes, the answer lies in between both of you. And if you both work on it, it will work. And to an extent, that can be true. In a healthy relationship with problems, that is true. If you both work on it, it can resolve. You can resolve the issues. In an emotionally abusive relationship, especially one with some of the stuff that you've already mentioned here, something bigger, something stronger, something deeper needs to happen. And that usually involves a path of self-healing. It usually involves a path of self-learning, self-discovery, an understanding of who you are at a deeper level. Because who you were when you got into the relationship is probably not who you are today. And if you miss who you were, you need to get that back. And in order to get that back, you have to focus or redirect your energy back to yourself. And when you do that, you start to reconnect, you start to feel more grounded in yourself. But when you're with the other person or around the other person, they have a huge influence on you. They have a huge influence on your decision making. Every time you think something, they are in that thought process. They are somehow involved. And because they're involved, you are in a fog. That's what I like to call it, is that when you leave an emotionally abusive relationship, you're in the fog for about 2 to 4 months, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. But while you are away from that abusive person, if there's been any sort of trauma bond that has formed, which is usually there, because the longer you're in a relationship with somebody that you want to love, then you finally get out of that relationship, there's usually still some sort of attachment there. And because that attachment's there, you're still in a fog. You're still basically in the relationship, but in a mental and emotional way. Physically, you might be out of it, but your brain is still wired to include them in every thought. Your brain is still wired to think that that's how you're supposed to think. You're supposed to have them in your every thought. And when they're in your every thought, that's what I call the fog. You're clouded. You're clouded with their influence, even when they're not around. And so this is why it can take some time for that fog to lift so you can think clearly. Now, the fog never lifts when you're with the person who never stops. If this person never stops hurting you, never stops being emotionally abusive towards you and doing the behaviors they're doing, if that doesn't stop, the fog never lifts, and then you never see clearly. You never think clearly. You don't know what to do. You're not sure how to move forward, which is why sometimes it's better to separate and think for yourselves, think about yourself, focus on yourself, and then you can see if you want to return. I'm not suggesting this. Everyone's situation is different. Some people can't do this, but I have noticed with all my work in the past decade, working with couples, that when they separate, when the fog lifts, then they can have clearer conversations without so much emotional baggage. I mean, some of the baggage is still there, some of the attachments are still there, but now there's a better sense of self. When you have a better, stronger sense of yourself, and you're not so influenced or influenced at all by the other person, then you can make good decisions. That's how you come to a place inside yourself where you feel good and feel comfortable in your own skin and are able to say things like, no, I won't accept that behavior anymore. But if you never get out of the toxicity of an emotionally abusive relationship, then you may never get to that point where you say, this is my limit. This is my threshold. This won't happen anymore. If you can do that while in the relationship, no matter what has happened, and you define for yourself what your threshold is, you will find yourself thinking in a totally different direction. Whatever you thought before was impossible becomes possible. But it takes strength, it takes courage, it takes the belief that you're going to survive this no matter what. It takes that belief, and that's when inner resources are available to you. And those inner resources kind of disappear when you're with somebody that starts chipping away at the very essence of who you are. I don't want that to happen to you. It might have already happened to you, but you can get that back and stay on track, and you will get that back. I hope this helps you. Thank you so much for writing. And remember, no one deserves what you've been through. No one. You wouldn't accept it if you saw somebody else going through it. You shouldn't accept it for yourself. Share this with others that might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the Mean Workbook, an assessment and healing guide for difficult relationships. The workbook helps you pinpoint exactly what's going on in your relationship, outlining the behaviors causing you to leave so many interactions feeling bad. Take the assessment in the workbook and gain clarity on what your next best steps are. After you purchase the workbook, you'll get an invite to the private peer support group on Facebook. Visit loveandabuse.com for more information. If you've discovered that you are doing the hurtful behaviors to someone that you care about and you'd like to change that about yourself, sign up for the Healed Being program over at healedbeing.com. The course comes with a private online group where I and others will give you direct support. It's time to stop making those you love feel bad. Go to healedbeing.com. And if you're looking for a safer way to listen to this show where all the titles to the episodes are changed, click on the Safe Listening button on the podcast page over at loveandabuse.com. This show exists to remind you that you are not alone and you're not going crazy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve honesty and sincerity. You deserve to be treated as worthy and significant. Because you are. We'll talk again soon.